Hey everyone, my name is Sara Harberson and I'm America's College Counselor. It's good to be back. The first Facebook Live of 2024. I want to make sure that all of you can hear and see me. Good, I'm starting to see some people join. This is how I got started really with Facebook Lives. Because I'm able to reach a lot of you, whether it's a student, a parent, a counselor who's trying to help a lot of students at their high school. I really find that these Facebook Lives are so important to all of you because you can get great information without having to pay anything. So I have always tried to continue to do these Facebook Lives, but I haven't had one in a couple of months, so it's good to be back. And the way that these work is it is a rapid fire Q&A. So what I'm going to try to do is go through each of your questions one by one and try to squeeze in as many as we can so that you all feel like you have incredible information and guidance along the way. I should add that I do a ton of free stuff for all of you. So I do a weekly blog. I have free resources that you can download. You just need to provide your email address. I do these Facebook Lives. I used to do a bunch of Instagram Lives, especially during the pandemic. I want to make sure that all types of families and students can access incredible information about the college admissions process. But obviously, if you want more support, I have a number of private Facebook groups called Application Nation that allow families to pay a monthly subscription, and they're able to ask me questions all of the time and get more one-on-one access to me working with their child, whether it's a mock interview or their college list or essay editing or a bunch of other things. But tonight is about all of you and making sure that we get some of these questions answered. So let's go from the top down and see what we have. All right. Regarding recommendation letters, colleges request one math, science, and one humanities teacher. Would AP Computer Science principal's teacher be considered a good choice for a computer science major student? If yes, would that teacher be considered a math science teacher as it is considered an elective? Okay, so a couple of things. I think a lot of families are surprised to hear about letters of recommendation and where the teachers, what subject matters they should come from. There are only a couple of colleges that I know of in the US that put restrictions on which teachers they want those letters of recommendations from. So obviously if these colleges are on your list or your child's list, you want to be aware of it. But most of the other colleges in the US, they're just focused on core academic teachers. But if you are applying to MIT and Wesleyan University, for those two institutions, one of your letters of recommendation should come from a math or science teacher. One letter should come from a humanities teacher. It could be your English teacher, your history teacher, or even your foreign language or ancient language teacher that you have in high school. Computer science is tricky though. I like to view computer science as an add-on class on the student schedule. Not that I want students taking more classes than they need to, but not all colleges view computer science as a core academic subject, as a math or science. So to be safe, in general, I like students to take their 5 core classes, and then if they have room in their schedule and interest and ability, they can take AP Computer Science Principles or AP Computer Science A. Because colleges are inconsistent with how they view computer science, you will need to do some research before you ask those teachers for letters of recommendation or that specific teacher. So what I would do is call the admissions offices for the colleges on your list and talk to someone who is knowledgeable, like an admissions officer on duty, to find out if the AP Computer Science teacher would be viewed as a core academic teacher. Obviously, it makes sense. It would be lovely to have that teacher, but we just want to make sure that the colleges on your list will view that as a valued letter of recommendation. My son does not believe he's going to do well on the AP chemistry exam because they've had a substitute teacher the past 2 months and the kids are self-taught. That frustrates me. I don't like hearing that. Is it better to not take the exam? Do some schools like Georgetown require all AP scores to be submitted? Okay. So I'm a mom of 3 kids. My oldest is a high school senior, and frankly, I've made it really clear to her that if she does not feel prepared for the AP exam, I don't want her to take it and be under a ridiculous amount of pressure or stress, especially if she didn't learn enough of the content in the class for a variety of reasons. You know, sometimes it is a substitute teacher, sometimes because, you know, there was a teacher strike and they didn't get through everything. Sometimes it's the first year that the teacher's teaching that AP class. So unless a high school has a requirement that the student has to take the AP exam, I'm of the belief that the student should put their energy towards what they think they can make the biggest difference on. So it could be another AP exam that's coming up, or maybe they just need to focus on doing really well on their final exams because their final grade is right on the edge. So I'm not someone who's going to force a student to take the AP exams if they're not prepared to do it. Are there some colleges in this country that expect to get AP scores? Yes, I would say so. And Georgetown probably fits into that very small group of institutions. If we actually look at the language on the Georgetown admissions website, they technically say that they're not required AP scores, but they are encouraged. And there are a few other schools like that. I would say MIT and Carnegie Mellon and Georgetown, all 3 of those schools seem to want to get their hands on as many AP scores as possible. But here's the thing. If a student takes an AP exam and doesn't do as well as they thought, it is truly, for the vast majority of colleges, their choice in determining which scores, if any, they self-report to the colleges, because for the most part, it's self-reported AP scores in the admissions process. The University of Michigan's admissions office suggested we email the admissions officer back in December to update them when my daughter won a Young Arts Award. Should we mention this again in the expression of interest form just in case they haven't seen it? I wouldn't repeat information. I have this saying when I'm working with students in Application Nation, I want students to think about this application process as a layering process and to make their application and their full file, even if materials come in after the application, make sure that things are layered and not hammered. When something is hammered again and again and again in the application, or even twice, the admissions officer tends to get annoyed with it. So if the student has already updated them on that award, I wouldn't mention it again in the expression of interest for University of Michigan. What does the landscape for standardized testing look like? Is it remaining test optional? Great question. Yes, for the most part. There are some colleges that have already returned to requiring the SAT and ACT. MIT is one of them. Gosh, we've been talking a lot about MIT tonight. University of Tennessee is one of them. Interestingly, the University of Florida and Florida State University never went test optional, so they still require the ACT and SAT. But you can see I'm scrounging to find those names. Will we see more colleges possibly return to requiring the SAT or ACT? Yes, possibly, as they look at data and how these students who have not reported scores are doing on their campuses. But for the most part, colleges are continuing to be test optional. However, I would say that the highly selective colleges that went test optional due to the pandemic, instead of having a test optional policy in place long before that, I'm seeing, they don't want to admit this, but we have so many students in Application Nation applying to different schools that we start to see trends in who colleges are admitting and who they aren't. We're seeing some clear trends with highly selective colleges that are test optional, that they seem to be clearly favoring students with test scores submitted and high test scores at that. Is the FAFSA required for merit scholarships to be awarded? It's going to vary from college to college, but there are some colleges out there that even if you're not applying for need-based financial aid, they want you to fill out the FAFSA to be considered for merit scholarships. So it's on a case-by-case basis, and you just simply have to, you know, look at your admissions portal or check out the admissions website to see if the FAFSA is required for merit consideration. And if it's not clear, I always tell students, call the admissions office. And as much as I love student workers because they were so important to the admissions process when families were visiting, they don't know all of the nuances to the admissions process. So I always recommend that if you have an admissions question that is unrelated to just basic information, I would try to speak to an admissions officer on duty when you're calling the admissions office. Oh, Alfia, happy to be back. Oh, give Sasha my best. She is something else. She actually came up in a conversation with Sara, Rosari, and I. Her ears must have been ringing. One of my favorite students of all time. Okay, what can a student who loves English and literature do in the summer to enhance their college applications other than work or volunteer? Oh my gosh, there's so many cool things that students can do, but I love how you're thinking, because this is how I think, and this is what strengthens a student's application. Most colleges, when they're looking at a student's application, they're looking at the major choice, whether they want to admit it or not. And in some cases, even, you know, the colleges are keeping track of how many English majors they admit, or computer science majors, or business majors. So I always tell students, you want to have evidence to back up that major choice, because it really can strengthen your application. And obviously you want to take the right classes and get the right grades in those subject matters, but you can also show evidence by doing an activity that backs up that interest, and summertime is a really great time to do it. Okay, here's some ideas for a future English major, which I love. I was a minor in English in college. One thing would be to write for a local newspaper, or maybe even a neighborhood magazine or a newsletter, or be a copy editor for one of those publications in your local area. Another thing that you can do is, I mean, I still consider myself a writer. I don't have as much time to write these days. I have time to do a weekly blog, but I don't have time to write another book these days. But if I did, and I was a high school student and I loved to write, I would plan a writing project for the summer, and I would make that my full-time job. You have to be really disciplined, but you know, let's say there is a student writer that wants to write a collection of short stories the summer before senior year. You don't need to get published. It's just the idea that you have a collection of short stories and you put in, let's say, 40 hours a week for 8 weeks. That will look so special on your application, on your activities list. The key is, you know, how to present it, right? And what the title of that collection is. Make sure it's clear. So you can apply that if you are a short story writer, if you are a poet, if you want to write the first draft of a novel. So be a writer. If you want to write for the summer. Another idea is to see if there are any professors, English professors, that are looking for a research assistant. Because it's English and a lot of the humanities, you don't have to be in person. You can probably do it virtually. In my Application Nation group, I give everybody, I need to post that, Sara Masari, just remind me tomorrow when I have a chance. I have this great sample email that high school students can send professors, because you almost have to do a cold email, but you want to make that email, the subject line and the actual content of the email, something that the professor will read. So all my Application Nation class of 2025 students and my younger Application Nation students, you should be getting a sample email so you know what to do. So those are a couple of ideas. I also think, you know, you can work with younger students. There are some writing programs. I have this young woman. She's going to be a senior in college, an incredible creative writer herself, and she worked at, it was like something like Writopia. I don't remember exactly the name, but there are these writing programs for younger students, and she taught writing there. So those are a couple of ideas. I hope they're helpful. Is it okay to take AP Human Geography instead of History as a core class? I love AP Human Geography. You know, I think it's a really great class for a lot of different students who are interested in anthropology, science, environmental science, population growth. I think it's just a great culture. I see it as a great social studies core class, but I wouldn't take it in place of US history or AP US history. I think AP US history or US history, if it's not required, at least the basic US history class, if it's not required for graduation, I would say AP US history is really a staple class that most strong, high achieving students that are applying to the more selective colleges will take. So I would say take AP US history 1 year, AP Human Geography another year, and the other 2 years, definitely another history social studies class, because I'm a big believer, because I've seen it happen for 25 years working in this field. It's really important to make sure that you still take your 5 core classes for all 4 years of high school if you can. So 4 years of English, math, science, foreign language, or ancient languages like my daughter, and history or social studies. My child's school is offering an ethnic studies course. Let me just take a sip of water. As a potential replacement for US history. Do colleges prefer a traditional US history course? The class can be taken instead of US history. Okay, this is gonna sound really traditional and conservative and boring, but when it comes to a student's high school curriculum, you gotta stick to those core traditional classes. So even if the high school is counting that as an equal replacement to US history, I almost see that as an extra class, maybe an elective social studies class. I would still prioritize US history. It's possible that if the school does a really good job on the high school profile and explains that class, that some admissions officers might read the profile carefully enough to see that, but I would probably play it safe. And if you want to take that class, which sounds really, really cool, I would take that as an extra class, not in place of US history. What do colleges think about the AP Capstone diploma? It seems that many colleges do not accept the seminar and research AP classes. Okay, so give you a little bit of history. You have to remember, like, there's so much competition in this college admissions process, especially for the companies like the College Board. And so the College Board created the AP Capstone diploma program to compete with the International Baccalaureate IB diploma program. If you're not familiar with the IB program, it initially started overseas that would allow students to have a international education where they could still go to basically any college. And there are a good number of American high schools that offer the IB program. And you won't get an admissions officer to admit this, but if a student is doing the full IB diploma program and doing higher levels in 3 or 4 subjects, it's really, really impressive. But I might add, it's really, really difficult to do. So the College Board said, you know what? We want our high schools using the AP program to feel, you know, just as respected. I don't think it quite took off the way the College Board wanted it, but there are a lot of high schools offering this 2-year sequence program where they take a year AP seminar and then AP research as well. I find that the students who take those 2 classes get a lot out of it, and I find them to be really prepared for college writing and college research. So I do think that they are highly valuable. We just want to be careful with AP research and AP seminar. There are some high schools that are counting that as a student's English class in a given year, usually junior and senior year. Not all colleges will count AP research and AP seminar as a required English class. So just like AP Computer Science Principles and just like AP Computer Science A, which I talked about at the beginning of our live, I see AP Research and AP Seminar as an add-on class, which means the student would be taking their 5 core classes plus AP Research one year and AP Seminar the other year. Are colleges going to give credit for those scores? It's really going to vary from college to college. You will see that if it's a more selective college, the requirements to get credit or advanced standing are definitely going to be harder than some other colleges, so just keep that in mind. Tips for picking who to ask for recommendations. Yeah, I mean, you know, I'm so intentional about every piece of the application. So for example, in AN 2025, we have an entire Zoom call coming up in March on picking the right teachers. I am very specific. I care about every student's application and every section of their application, including those recommendation letters. So here's some tips. Stick with the core academic teachers: English, math, science, history or social studies, and those language teachers like French, Spanish, German, Latin. Latin teachers write the best letters. They're just incredible writers and editors, by the way. So stick with those core academic teachers. That's number one. I have so many students though that are like, I'm gonna apply to a business program. I wanna ask my, accounting teacher to write me a letter of recommendation. Those are considered elective teachers. Stick with your core teachers. More tips. Try to ask a junior year teacher if possible. It doesn't always work out that way, especially if 2 are required and you've had some instability with your teachers, meaning, they were out on maternity leave or you had a substitute. It may not be a consistent teacher in junior year, so sometimes you can look at sophomore year teachers. There are some truly elite colleges that are saying now on their website in terms of recommendation letters, you can ask a junior or senior year teacher. Here's the thing. If you're having a teacher for the first time senior year, that is not enough time for them to get to know you and you to get to know them and show what you're made of and prove to them how strong of a student you are to be able for them to write a letter of recommendation. If you follow my approach in Application Nation, you're applying to possibly an early decision school and multiple early action schools that will probably, some of them will require teacher recommendation letters. So I don't recommend just asking a teacher that you've only had for senior year. A couple more things to think about. It doesn't always work out this way, but think about your major choice and does a subject matter line up or complement your major choice? So for example, let's say that the student, wants to be a creative writing major. They should consider asking an English teacher. Let's say the student is interested in business. Who are the best teachers to write for business applicants? It's not the business teacher. It could be one of their math teacher, maybe from junior year, although not all math teachers are going to write a very flowery, detailed letter of recommendation, like maybe your AP micro and macroeconomics teacher or your AP US history teacher, or even your English teacher from junior year. So try to match it up if you can, at least one of your teachers. And then finally, you want to be thinking about the teacher who taught you in the class that you really excelled at. I hear so many students tell me, well, I'm going to ask Mr. So-and-so or Miss So-and-so because they saw me grow so much in the year. And that's when I get worried, because I used to work at a highly selective university where we were nitpicking things on the student's application. We didn't want to read a letter of recommendation about a student that struggled at the beginning of the school year but worked really hard to get their grade up. I know that that teacher might know the student well, but I get nervous about those teachers. So pick the teachers that you've done really well in their classes and you've had conversations with them beyond class. What should my sophomore, has no extracurricular activities besides her sports, tennis takes up all of her time. Yeah, I totally get it. I understand. But it is important to show your range as a community member, at least in the eyes of colleges. So you want to think about it. It's almost like I wish I could show an 8th grader or a 9th grader what the activities section of an application looks like, because I want them to see what colleges are looking for when they're going to be seniors. So if you were to look at Common Application, which is the most widely accepted application out there, there is room for 10 activities. You don't have to fill up all 10 activities, but I would say it's fairly common that students do, because they're capturing not just sports and high school clubs, they're capturing jobs and family responsibilities and even independent hobbies like writing a collection of short stories. And so when I'm talking to freshmen and sophomore students, I want them to understand that, yes, they should be doing things that mean something, and volunteering, for example. They shouldn't just be doing things just to impress colleges, but having just one activity or 2 activities can make that list look really short. So what I recommend is, to start testing some things out. Start going to some club meetings. That's a good place to start, I think, at your high school, because it's a safe environment, it's comfortable, you will know people at those club meetings. So I think that's an easy way to start. I also think summertime is a great opportunity to try new things. And I would say going into junior year, I would want your daughter thinking about some of the academic areas that she's interested in, possible major choice, and having at least one activity match up with that beyond sports. What are your thoughts on the Wall Street Journal Pulse rankings versus US News? It's funny because I'm gonna tell you a real story of me growing up. I think some of you might know this, but I had no guidance besides my dad trying to help me through the college admissions process. I didn't have a counselor that was in the know. She didn't know me very well. I was going to a high school where not many students went on to college, so I looked at those rankings a lot. I remember US News maybe had first come out. I don't know what year it came out, but at least when I was a high school senior, it was available. And I cared so much about those rankings. And when I first was an admissions officer, I think I paid attention to it a lot. And I noticed that when I first became a school counselor and I was helping students build a college list, I was coming from an environment where I knew the college where I worked at really, really well. But then when I was asked to put together a college list for a high school student, it was really difficult. And I noticed myself leaning on those rankings. But the fact is, at this point, I know so many colleges and I know what their strengths are that I really don't look at those rankings, because they make us believe in valuing colleges for the wrong things, for data and metrics, when the reality is we need to, make sure that the student feels like it is a positive match, a good environment for them. So I don't need rankings anymore. I understand why families look at them, but you look at how they're created and they're all a little bit different and they all value things a little bit differently or weigh things a little bit differently. I just think, not that I'm distrustful of colleges, but we have seen a number of colleges come out or be frankly caught that they were lying and not providing these publications or ranking systems with accurate information. So what do I go on? I go on a college visit. I see what they offer. I look at the student body. I look at the programs and majors. I look at graduation rates and retention rates. I look at acceptance rates. because they tell a bigger story. I look at job placement as well, and for a lot of families, that's important. I look at how much funding they have for need-based financial aid. These are things that really are important to the families that I work with. So I don't pay attention to most of them or any of them. Do you have a chance at a top school without a perfect GPA? You do, you really do. If you're talking about kind of a highly selective college, and I define highly selective colleges as colleges that have an overall acceptance rate of 25% or less. You can find that out hopefully by checking out the college's admissions website for the most recent admission cycle, or by doing the math yourself on the college's common data set, which, just remember, it's usually a year or two delayed. But yes, you can still get into these schools having a B or a B plus here or there. I would say if you're looking at those highly selective colleges, though, you have to remember you need to have the most challenging curriculum that's offered at your high school, not just good grades, but having the most challenging curriculum and having a record that is dominated by A's is still going to keep you fairly competitive. But you also have to remember the high school that you're coming from. And even if your high school doesn't rank its students, if other students from your high school are applying to the same colleges, those admissions officers absolutely are going to look at what the rigor of your curriculum is like how many AP classes did you take junior and senior year or each year of high school. And they're going to look at your cumulative GPA if it's provided or recalculate it. And they're first comparing you within your high school community. So if you have highly selective colleges on your list, you really want to be towards the very top or at the top of your class for your best chance of admission. My daughter took Chinese in 8th, 9th, 10th grade. All 3 years show up on her high school transcript. Let me see, did I skip that? That's a really long question. Hopefully I can catch it all. The school district canceled the Chinese program due to a lack of interest. That makes me so sad. And the one Chinese teacher in our district decided to retire at the end of the school year. If my child is not able to fit a dual enrollment Chinese class into her schedule her junior year, which is the best option, should she take online Chinese class? Should she stop taking a foreign language and concentrate more on STEM classes? Either way, she will provide an explanation, good, on her college applications as to what happened. I want to keep her options open. Yeah, so when there is a scheduling conflict, when the high school no longer offers a class or a program, the student is not technically expected to find a class somewhere else to fill that gap. So that's something to keep in mind. However, we want to put some safety nets in here. It is the responsibility of a high school to provide colleges either by sending it in with the transcript or making it clearly accessible on the high school website, an up-to-date and accurate profile. And so if a class or a program has been discontinued, it is the high school's responsibility to make that very clear on the profile. Just in case, though, I tell students in the additional information section of your application, if there is this situation where you weren't able to take a core academic class one year, make sure you provide a short explanation. So should your child seek out an online class to continue taking Chinese, that would be lovely if they can. It wouldn't be held against them if they couldn't. So if they couldn't take an online Chinese class, I would want your daughter filling that slot with another core academic class. What is your perspective on submitting test scores with a high GPA? Is it a liability if scores are not perfect? Pardon me for saying this. It's so frustrating. I'm a student advocate, but with these colleges that have a test optional policy, especially the highly selective colleges, if the student doesn't report test scores or report high test scores, they're at a disadvantage. If they report scores, but they're only kind of average or below average, that can hurt them as well. So it's almost like you're damned if you do, and you're damned if you don't. So I would just say that if you are looking at highly selective, especially highly selective universities, even more so than the highly selective small liberal arts colleges, because a lot of those small liberal arts colleges have been test optional for a long time. If you're looking at highly selective universities that went test optional in the last couple of years because of the pandemic and continue to be test optional, be just cautious about it, because if you apply without scores, the bar is significantly higher for you. You've got a lot to prove, and it can be more difficult to get in. If you report your scores and they're good, but they're not exceptional, that can hurt you as well, especially if you're coming from a more dominant background, or you're coming from an overrepresented state for that college. So keep that in mind. My belief is don't worry so much about applying to these highly selective universities that everybody seems to be applying. I want students to make sure they're applying to the right schools for them. There are a lot of test optional colleges that really value that policy and treat it the way it should be. So if you have a test optional policy, the student can report scores. They have a decision. They don't have to report them, but either way, students should not be disadvantaged if they decide not to report scores. And that's how you handle test optional policies, in my opinion. As you can see, I feel pretty strongly about it. I just feel like if you're sending mixed messages and you're not admitting students who aren't reporting scores, then you shouldn't have a test optional policy. That's just my opinion. Oh, aloha, Sarah. Hi, Shannon. Oh my gosh, I haven't seen that name pop up in a while. I hope your daughter's doing well. Still can't believe where she is and what she got. Okay, huge scholarship. Okay, aloha, Sarah. Hope you are well. Can't believe I'm now preparing my sophomore in high school for the process. Wow. Can you tell me what you think about STEM or honors designations from high schools? Are these impressive at all to admissions officers? Oh, it's so good to hear from you. So I would say what matters to admissions officers, they care deeply about the designation that is listed. Sometimes it's listed before or after the course title on a student's transcript. And they like seeing AP. They like seeing honors if that's the precursor to AP classes. I don't think a high school has to label a class STEM for it to get respected, but I would just say that a lot of the STEM classes that high schools offer, and even some other subject matters, you know, they are still considered a lot of times like an elective class, like a robotics class or an intro to engineering class. You could say that these are STEM classes, but these are still going to be viewed as elective classes. And unfortunately, they don't carry the same weight as a AP or an honors or an IB class or whatever the high school designations are. Okay. All right, on that note, I think I'll end with a familiar name and a familiar family because they are incredible. We have so many Application Nation families who join these Facebook Lives, and I really appreciate it. It makes me feel like I know you guys. And all those families who are new to these Facebook Lives or new to me, I would just encourage you, take advantage. I give out so much free information. I just recorded 4 new reels that we're going to be posting to my social media accounts in the next couple of weeks. I'll have a blog this week, as almost every week of the year. I'll try to do more Facebook Lives and try to squeeze in some Instagram Lives in the meantime. You can also read my book, SOUNDBITE. You can join Application Nation or Application Nation Class of 2025. And I just want to make sure that you all get the best information and best advice you can in this admissions process. So on that note, have a great night, everyone, and I hope to see you soon. Take care. Bye.